Close enough? You swallow it? Good afternoon. Welcome to the final for this semester. The final research seminar, and this one is on accelerating agriculture's climate resiliency. So I'd like to welcome you to the knowledge well, because we're going to get some great knowledge this time. Let me see if I can advance these slides. Okay. Amy? Oh, how do I do that? You give them PhDs and... Oh, thank you. Oh, okay. It's still not advancing. I'll use this thingy jobber. This thingy jobber is not advancing either. Technology. So the run of show today is that we'll have the presentations, which are questions after the presentations. And then Jean, my colleague here in the center, will lead a panel discussion where you can ask questions. He'll have a few canned questions and get clarification from the folks that you've heard from today. And before I start, because I always forget to do this at the end, I want to thank Amy and Anna and Paula for all the work that they put into helping with training these guys as well. So, without further ado, we do these seminars with the goals of sharing our ongoing research priority areas, research that's going on in the college in these priority areas, and also not only to stimulate thinking, but to stimulate collaborations amongst you, to try to get people to work together to solve these big challenges that we've identified as the college strategic plan. And also to develop our people's skills in communication. And I want to also thank our panel, which we'll thank them later, but they put a lot of time. All of the panels that have done this have put a lot of time. We even do rehearsals with them. So they do a lot of work on this. So the focus areas that we've been working towards are, as we call it, Paula's peach tree. And we're now on the last of the peaches, which is accelerating agriculture's climate resiliency. And this, we talk about this as empowering and accelerating breakthrough discovery in the adaptation of plants, animals, and ecosystems through unprecedented convergence of disciplines and integration of basic and applied research. So you're going to hear today some folks how they're approaching this question and how they're working towards these goals. And the first speaker this afternoon is Christopher Gomans, and Christopher is from the Department of Ag and Resource Economics.
I need to turn that off. All right, great, thank you. Well, thank you for having me here today. As was mentioned, I'm Chris Gomans. So as many of you or some of you may know, I originally I come from Bakersfield, California. And for those of you that don't know where Bakersfield is, it's kind of in the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley. It's known for country music. It's known for air pollution. I like to think that Bakersfield gave me my asthma, and it also gave me my love of economics, and specifically natural resource and environmental economics. So as a kid, we were faced with a number of droughts. This is just one example of how we responded to drought as a kid. And I thought, isn't it weird to paint your lawn green? Is this our adaptation strategy? Well, the reality is that drought is not new. Water shortages are not new. In this graphic that I have up here on the top panel, we have monthly PDSI, and we can think about that as a measure of water availability. If it's negative, it means we're in a drought. If it's less than -3, they tend to think of that as an extreme drought. So from 1950 to 2001, which is what you see up here, we've had a number of severe droughts, right? So drought isn't new. On the bottom panel, we have the number of calls. So what does that mean? In Colorado and in other states throughout the West, we use the prior appropriation doctrine to allocate water. A call is placed when there isn't enough water and we have to short someone. Again, calls are not new. What is new is the introduction of climate change, more severe more regular, more intense droughts, as well as some institutional changes that have gone into place. And so what do we see? In 2002 through 2006, roughly, extreme drought. Changes into how we handle the calls on the river institutionally have resulted in a much larger frequency of drought. Today, you're going to hear about a lot of research dealing with how individual producers, livestock producers, peach producers can respond to drought. The research that I'm going to talk about and share with you today is part of a jointly funded project that involves the University of Arizona, it involves the University of Nevada, Reno, and Colorado State University. Our part is focused on the South Platte River. The South Platte River is an excellent place to study these issues, to look at a macro scale, how we can change our institutions, implement policies that better make us able to respond to these changing climate conditions and growth in Colorado. So this is the South Platte River up here. One thing you'll notice is that the red is the urban, densely populated areas. The green is agriculture, and South Platte is unique and representative of many areas throughout the world in that we have very dense urban areas. Out east, we have primarily agricultural areas, and then we have this ag-urban interface where we're battling urban growth and agriculture. So what we want to do is build a model that allows us to understand how individual producers are going to be impacted by changes in land use, changes in climate, and changes in population growth. Ironically, in order to do that kind of macro scale modeling, we need to know how individual producers are going to respond. So there's a bit of a circularity there. To do that, we build these large scale models that rely on agricultural water demand models, urban water demand models, water supply models that look at what we can expect in terms of river flows, temp and precip under different climate scenarios. And all of this is an attempt to look at how do we mitigate some of the challenges that we face, the issues that we're going to face due to changing climatic conditions and rapid population growth. So traditionally what we've done is we've looked at expanding reservoir capacity, building infrastructure. More recently, we've thought about reducing water demands through conservation efforts. And then we can also layer on top of that, what if we got really crazy and we changed how we allocate water? The goal of this project and some of the others we have on campus to look at how that affects the system. So this is just an illustration of the type of output that we get from this modeling effort. On the top row, we have panel A, and panel A shows us the shortages that we would expect to experience in the near future, the next 30 years, under each of the different climate scenarios that we run. Really dry, for lack of a better term, really wet and warm, for lack of a better term. And then as we move across that graphic, we've got a baseline where we don't change anything. We've got in panel B, we've got what if we add 25% to our storage capacity? In panel C, what if we implement policies that result in 10% demand reduction or 20% demand reduction? What we'll see here in this graphic is that adding storage only works if we have wet and warm conditions. This traditional solution only works under certain climate scenarios, whereas demand reduction is going to reduce those shortages across all of the different climate scenarios. This is the type of lessons that we're looking to learn from these modeling efforts. Now, after the fact, it may seem obvious. Adding capacity to this river is not going to reduce shortage, right? But these modeling efforts help us understand the challenges that people are facing, individual users throughout the basin under these different climate and population growth scenarios, so they can better adapt and build more resilient systems in the face of this growth. So I'll turn it over.
Okay, our next speaker will be Perry Cabot, and he's joining us online from our Western Colorado Research Center. Hi, Perry. You're on.
Hello. You got me?
Sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
Can you hear me?
And
Okay. Okay, very good. Let's make sure this works then. Are you looking at my presentation? Awesome. Okay, well, I get to explain my simple topic of artificial intelligence here in 5 minutes. And so let's start out with the fact that we need to put the curtains up on the irritated pasture. What does that have to do with anything? Well, this is what my phone was hearing as I was trying to. Did I lose you?
Perry, you have to
Yes, I
share
can.
your screen with us. So we're looking at your title slide in the room, but otherwise we're going to have you direct your slides as you would through Teams.
Okay, let's give that a shot then. I thought we did that. Okay, how does that look? How does that look?
Perry, this is good.
Okay, very good then. Okay, we're good. Thumbs up, Gene. Very good. Okay, so as I was saying, we got a pretty simple topic here to cover, artificial intelligence. And I do want to acknowledge that this is a team effort between a number of people, including Gene Kelly. So thanks for all the support. My first trying to do is figure out what I'm not seeing my slide advance. So you're seeing the slide. Okay, very good. Now I can see it. Yeah, so this is what I was confronted with every time I tried to get my phone to explain something to one of the producers or one of my collaborators up in a high mountain, high elevation area. We need to put the curtains on the irritated pasture. And so what was ultimately I was trying to say was we need to put the Kernza up on the irrigated pasture. And so what does this actually have to do with artificial intelligence? Well, what ultimately happened is my phone figured out what I was trying to say every time I said curtains up. It finally realized that I'm not trying to say curtains up. I'm trying to say Kernza because I kept correcting it. I'm not trying to say irritated. I'm trying to say irrigated. I'm not trying to say pasture. I'm trying to say pasture. And so within that phone, there is an artificial intelligence algorithm that knows that as I continue to make that correction, that phone begins to make that correction for me. So if you can take that mental model and think of it in the context of the work that we're trying to do in irrigation, that'll help us move along through this presentation. So we're in the middle out here of a fairly significant crossfire between investors coming from other places, and there have been NBC News programs about this, and farmers who are on the other side trying to figure out how exactly they're going to endure what is, in some, negative connotations, called drought profiteering. Some farmers are actually saying, I want to stay in farming. You got to give me more solutions. And so they're trying to learn how they can actually become more optimal with their water. And that optimality can take a couple different forms. At the Western Colorado Research Center, we've installed a linear move irrigation system to begin that process of understanding how we use water optimally. Now, I'm talking about differences here between conserved water and saved water. Optimal irrigation doesn't do anything to conserve water. You're still having evapotranspiration. The water's still leaving to the atmosphere. So this is an efficiency approach that is designed to deburden the river. In other words, that producer who has that linear move system, that sprinkler system on their farm, does not have to divert as much water. And so consequently, that water can exist in other places and be essentially moved and stored like Chris was talking about. So we have a new linear move irrigation system here at the Research Center. Like I said, thanks to a lot of collaborative efforts. All right, now what? What are we really supposed to do with this thing? Well, over the past year, we've had a team of faculty and students collecting an enormous amount of high resolution data for this field. Some of that data takes the form of soil texture, some of its organic matter, some of its nitrogen levels, some of its electrical conductivity. But what we're essentially doing is taking an environmental snapshot of that field in preparation for designing an optimal irrigation prescription. So the geodata we collect prior to planting are things that many of you are familiar with: your sand, your silts, your clays, organic matter, nitrogen levels, different depths. And then prior to field preparation, we went out there with our salt sniffer and got electrical conductivity data. So this is, the classic big geodata types of work. And then during the cropping season, we're out there with our drone looking at classic measurements like NDVI and soil moisture. Again, a big array across the field. So that's the big data portion of the field collection process, or the data collection process. The last little element is this variable that we're trying to manipulate, and that's the continuous yield monitoring that we're doing during the harvest time. So we're trying to look at, this is our field last year when it was furrow irrigated. You can see there's a lot of variability in that field. We could be doing better in terms of yield. We could be applying water less to some places and possibly more to other places, being more resource conscious. But ultimately, the idea is to we're back on then. So the ultimate idea is to use that data in that lower left corner. You see that smart, that big geodata, and combine that with the hardware that we use and the algorithms that come out of the programming team that we're working with to build essentially the artificial intelligence component of this. And what this is this is the advanced approach that my phone is taking when it's making those corrections. That's what that AI is in the middle of all of the convergence of all those operations. So what am I actually trying to do here if I'm a farmer? Well, what you're ultimately trying to do is you're trying to write an irrigation prescription. In other words, rather than just dumping water on the ground and furrow irrigating and saying, we're just going to saturate the soil and do the best we can, what we're effectively trying to do is use all that data to ultimately use variable rate irrigation on our sprinkler system in order to pluck these pixels and these zones within our field such that we can optimally apply our resources in accordance with what we want that position to be doing. If the yield is low, we want to maximize a little bit more. We want to maximize a little bit more resource there. We might want to back off water. So effectively, what you see is sort of a chessboard here that we can play using the Renke VRI tool that we are working with the Renke company in order to do. What you're looking there is basically a color coding of percent of evapotranspiration known by our Penman-Monteith ASCE standardized local weather station. And so the ultimate goal is for the farmer to essentially become some version of a chess grandmaster. Every position in that field has the ability to receive different irrigation prescriptions. And ultimately, the goal is to be more resource conscious and help farmers endure what is likely to be administrative or natural curtailments, possibly engage in crop transitions, and ultimately save their backs and their knees from having to be out there in those fields in the 100-degree heat. So, thank you. And I will stop sharing.
Okay, our next speaker is Ioannis Minas, and Ioannis is an associate professor in horticulture and landscape architecture.
For the pronunciation, you did it. Hello, everyone. For the ones who don't know me, I was born in this and raised in a peach orchard in this beautiful valley in northern Greece. And this picture shows you peach bloom time, which for everyone is a time of hope. However, this is also the time of extreme stress for peach growers because the risk for frost is very high and also for crop loss. This was something that I never liked since my childhood, growing in a family farm. And that was mainly because of the lack of control over this. And that was partially the reason to look for a career in academia and not become a peach grower. The other reason was peach fuzz. I could not tolerate peach fuzz during peach harvest, so I said, peach professor. Since 2015, I joined CSU and Agriculture Experiment Station, and I was part of this beautiful landscape that reminds me of my homeland. I have been working with a unique industry that is known for the high quality peaches that receive the highest premium price in the nation. However, Western Colorado, like any other location that perennial fruit trees are grown, is affected by the changing environment. Climate resiliency in fruit trees is challenged by early springs and late frosts. In this picture, you see the result of an extreme freezing event in mid-April 3 years ago. That single event caused more than 90% of crop loss to our industry. That was not enough for our growers because in the same year, they had to experience extended summer with warm temperatures moving into fall. And then we had guess what? A rapid cold snap. The trees were green, non-acclimated. Right after, we went back in the lab, we observed extensive damage in the fruiting wood that also was associated with secondary infections from diseases. Next spring, we observed loss of scaffolds and loss of whole trees. So a fair question someone may ask is, can we predict or mitigate this? Climate resiliency of fruit trees is further challenged by seasonal and unpredictable inconsistencies in fruit harvest time and quality. Weather-based predictions alone have failed to provide information for planning, horticultural management, as well as labor and sales. So one question I'm trying to answer through my program is, could fruit data provide robustness in the harvest predictions and improve our management outcomes? Since 2016, my team has been working on the development of technology that could provide reliable and large-scale cold hardiness data. The system that we have optimized and validated is called differential thermal analysis, and we are using a programmable freezer and ceramic thermocouples that convert the heat of fusion during floral bud freezing to electric signal. This system is providing high resolution data that helped me build an impactful outreach program with our growers through my website with CSU and through regular updates that we provide them the actual status of cold hardiness at the time. We have also built robust cold hardiness models, weather-based, to provide reliable online information to the growers 24/7. This work was defended by my PhD student last Friday, David Sterling. We are also evaluating with this system different peach cultivars during the different phases of dormancy. So we are collecting large phenotyping data in order to help identify genetic and molecular signatures of cold hardiness. We are also evaluating horticultural management tools to speed up acclimation in fall, like with abscisic acid, or delay bloom in spring, like with ethethon. Over the last 6 seasons, we are also working on the development of robust, non-destructive technologies to estimate internal fruit quality and maturity with a single scan. Of high grower interest are our algorithms that predict peach harvest time with a combination of weather and spectral data. This season, we have about 6 Colorado peach growers that are participating in a pilot to test the impact of Excelsior technology in their orchards. So our intention, finally, is to provide accurate sensing data to inform peak buy and sell decisions across the entire supply chain. With that, I would like to thank you and my CSU pomology team and our collaborators for helping me develop some tools that promote resiliency in tree fruit systems.
next speaker is Mark Enns, who's a professor of animal sciences.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, when we first got together as a group to start discussing the topics we were going to present, Perry kept talking about AI. Well, I'm a livestock geneticist and animal breeder, so I'm immediately going to artificial insemination. And so once we got that figured out, and I'm sure for most of you, you're going to be happy to hear I'm not going to talk about artificial insemination. But I'm going to talk about using livestock genetics and selection to improve our climate resiliency and environmental sustainability. Now, I come from a long line of wheat farmers in Oklahoma, all the way from when my great-grandparents homesteaded to the present day. And you say, well, I'm a livestock geneticist. Well, why did I get interested in livestock? Well, in that part of Oklahoma, what we're able to do is plant a wheat crop, and over the course of about 4 months of the winter, we're able to actually put cattle on that and harvest that forage growth to produce beef, and then take those off and later also harvest it for grain. So we actually double crop one planting. And so in that process, because there's so much forage growth, we often had to buy cattle from other sources, and we tried to get those as light as possible so we had efficiency of gains. The problem with bringing cattle into a new environment was we had huge amounts of disease issues and antibiotic treatment, and we also had considerable amounts of mortalities. So from my perspective, that environment helped me develop a passion for agriculture, but it also said, can we do better? Can we actually make improvements in animal health and welfare, maybe select animals that reduce our use of antibiotics, reduce mortalities and inefficiencies in the system? Now, today's focus, though, is on environmental sustainability, and most of you would probably realize that beef cattle graze grass, and in that process, because they have a rumen, they emit methane and also excrete nitrogen, just like any other rumen species. So moose, elk, sheep, deer, all of those do the same thing. But in the process of grazing, they also help sequester carbon. But the question then becomes, are there ways we could actually reduce the emission rates for methane and excretion of nitrogen through selection? And so we know if breeders have the right tools over time, selection works. Starting from very early on when we just based selection on the way they looked to what we do today where we actually have massive amounts of data coming from breeders as well as genomic information to make predictions. And you can look at the trend over time. Once we have a goal, we can make genetic improvement. So the question then becomes, how can we leverage all of the genetic variability, the diversity in our beef cattle populations to make improvements in climate resiliency and improve the overall environmental sustainability of beef production? And so we've looked at this as a breeding and genetics team at CSU and Animal Sciences from a number of different ways, looking at can we select to improve longevity of species? Can we improve dry matter intake? Can we reduce death loss for high altitude, or perhaps look at the feedlot losses due to heart failure? But what I really want to focus on today is, can we leverage some of the new technologies that are being developed to direct our focus to develop a beef animal that is more climate sustainable? And so we have an ongoing project with the American Hereford Association and Olson Ranches in the panhandle of Nebraska, along with the Ag Next team at CSU, looking at the variability, the genetic diversity within the Hereford population related to the rate at which the animals produce methane and also the rate at which they excrete nitrogen. Okay? And the idea is, if we can establish there is genetic variability in that population, and we can then develop tools for breeders, we can actually reduce those impacts on the environment. And so in this process, the Olson ranches in Nebraska have installed equipment to measure individual methane output as well as feed intake, much like what we've done at the CSU RDEC facility. And they've brought in diverse groups of Herefords, and they've measured methane. We've taken blood samples to look at circulating nitrogen levels as a proxy for nitrogen excretion rates. And our results have shown that there are differences in the Hereford population. Okay? Now, the issue with that is we've established that, so there's probably the opportunity to make genetic improvement in the environmental impact of those animals in beef production. The challenge is the collection of that data is not very cheap. The equipment to measure individual methane and individual feed intake is very expensive. So what we're now doing is taking DNA samples and actually looking for regions of the genome so we can further enhance our ability to select animals that have a lower overall environmental impact. And I put up an example of how that's used. This is from some of our high altitude adaptability research, but essentially that's 700,000 SNPs on the bovine genome. So all of these animals, we have that panel on. And we're moving now to whole genome sequence, looking specifically for regions that we can use in our selection to reduce overall environmental impact. And that information is going to be essential. But we know that the breeders, that once that tool's there, they can use that to make genetic improvement. Now, as with any program, there's a huge team of us that are working on that. I want to make sure we recognize those from both within and outside of CSU. So.
Associate Professor in Soil and Crop Sciences.
So the front lines in the fight for climate resilience around the world is the agricultural drylands, and that's where my team, the Crop Adaptation Lab, works. We do a lot of work in the Sahel, which is the region just south of the Sahara Desert. Sahel means the shores in Arabic, so these are the shores of the Sahara Desert. So this is in Senegal. We work with plant breeding programs around the world and farmer organizations. This is not the Sahel. This is right here in Colorado, in southeast Colorado, in the western edge of the sorghum belts. So we also work to serve the growers here. So this is the field of some of the growers in the Colorado Sorghum Association. One thing I've learned working with plant breeders and farmer organizations around the world is that they share a lot of common interests despite the incredible diversity of their farms and their cultures. And one of the questions on everybody's mind is how to improve climate resilience. If you look at the popular press and also the scientific literature, there's a lot of divergence of opinion on what to do about this. In one camp believes that to go forward for the future of climate resilience in agriculture, we need to go back to ancient crops, whether it's wild relatives or traditional land races. And on the other side, they say we need to use new technology, transgenics or big data in conventional agriculture to get more resilience. So what does the science say? As an evolutionary geneticist, I know that it is quite likely that these ancient relatives do carry climate resilience traits that were lost during the domestication process. But as somebody who's been working as a crop scientist for these last 10 years, I know that these things have terrible yield. They are not adapted to modern production systems, and that's a reality that we have to confront. Yes, elite modern crops on the other side have been adapted to produce the food, the feed, fiber that we need, but it's true, they lack some climate resilience that they could have based on their underlying biology coming through that domestication bottleneck. So if we look at this at a genome level, we know that these ancient crop genomes do have some traits that we want to get into our modern varieties, but we have to acknowledge the fact that elite crop genomes have hundreds of alleles that have been combined by breeders over the last several decades to give society what it needs. So I've been working in my lab and with collaborators to get the best of both worlds, to make it true that both sides are right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about wheats. We've started recently a project serving the wheat growers. Our colleagues have developed these introgression lines. What are these? They've generated hundreds of offspring that have elite genetic backgrounds, the modern wheat backgrounds, with ancient genes sprinkled in. We're doing the same thing with sorghum in my own lab. We combine that with the personalized medicine for plants that we've developed over the last decade. So there we can get genetic fingerprints for offspring in plant breeding programs, and we can precisely, cheaply, quickly identify the plants that carry the resilience genes. And we can do this now in the world's poorest countries, and we do this all across West Africa, and we do it here in Colorado. And so with these integration lines, we can find the offspring that we're looking for that are carrying putative resilience genes. We can test them in our facilities at CSU, like the plant growth facility, under drought or control conditions, or in the field. And then we can find the ones that carry the genomes that have those ancient genes that we're looking for, but in this modern background. This shaves off literally a decade or more off the ability to get these into farmers' fields. So my call to action is, let's work together to rapidly improve plant traits. The technology is now there. So I know a lot of people in the room have specialized expertise that I don't have, and you are looking for diverse plant material to work on. And my suggestion is, don't go to the current varieties. They're not going to have the novel traits that you're looking for. They're easy to get, but they're not going to have the novel traits. Also, don't go to the gene bank. It's easy to order those materials right from the gene bank, but it's going to take 20, 30 years to get that into a farmer's field. Do come to us or our colleagues to get these material that we've developed. That's going to get your novel traits that you find into a grower's seed bag as soon as possible, and then off out to the outside world, where we can move the needle on climate resilience and the other things that we've committed to do for our stakeholders.
Thanks, Jeff. So our final speaker today before our panel discussion is Ada Strapanets. Sorry. And she is an associate professor in agricultural biology.
Thank you, Jan. This was the best pronunciation of my last name I've heard in my 25 years here, so thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. Healthy eating, rainbow plate, this is the stuff that our New Year's resolution is made out of, right? And we try every year. And what helps us along the way many times are those celebrities that popularize kind of niche foods and fun new vegetables and fruit that make this way more exciting than just eating more healthy. And some years ago, quinoa erupted as one of the new diet trends, the new hot thing to eat, right? And if you've got any quinoa in your pantry, you're already doing great things. It's a great food to eat. High in fiber, doesn't have any gluten. It's chock full of all the minerals and vitamins. It's got all the essential amino acids. It's a great thing to eat. The Powerball staple. Right? So I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but I bet few of you knew we grow quinoa in Colorado, and not just in Colorado, actually, and we are the third largest exporter of this crop. And we don't associate quinoa with Colorado because it's been grown for thousands of years in South America. And it's been grown by subsistence farmers, so they've grown it in the harshest environments, right? And this is what contributed to selection of quinoa land races that are adapted to a lot of extremes, right? Extreme temperatures, high elevation, really bad soils, poor soils, and the stuff that climate change is having us really worried about, drought. So just how good quinoa is at water use efficiency, it's remarkable. So if you compare it to some other crops we grow in the US, we all know corn is water hungry, and of course it requires 30 inches. That's a lot of irrigation during the growing season. Wheat, the crop we think of as a dryland crop, still requires over 20 inches of water. So you compare that to quinoa, it's excellent, does just fine with only 10 inches of water. So it's remarkable. And our growers in St. Louis Valley of Colorado know this, and that's why they love quinoa. A lot of potato producers grow it commonly with potato as a rotation. It's a fantastic crop for this. And there are some really important partnerships between quinoa producers in Colorado and Arden Mills that facilitate distribution of the grain. This is the stuff that's the powerful collaboration that elevates a niche crop, which quinoa is right now, to basically a commodity that is mainstream. That's what we love about this. And everything was going great until this little thing showed up and crashed the party. You're looking at a stem-boring fly, Amaromyza carli, no common name yet, unfortunately. It's a fly in a family Agramizidae. A lot of these flies are leaf miners, and I wish we were this lucky. This one is not. It's a stem borer. And this tiny perpetrator of a really massive disaster is a tiny little maggot, the immature form of this fly. It bores into the stem, shreds it to pieces, and then when she's ready to come out, when it's ready to come out, it's popping out of its stem and then leaving behind a little exit hole. So this has been a complete disaster for farmers. It kills the crop, you have to replant, and even if you escape it, the yields are really, really low. So this contributed to a whopping 70% decrease in quinoa acres last year. So this is a critical problem we have to solve. And USDA, luckily, has a program just for those critical kinds of issues. We put together a project along with my collaborator, Jane Stewart, who's a plant pathologist. I have 2 grad students working on this as well. It's a lot of work. And we have this wonderful collaboration between the quinoa producers and Arden Mills who are helping us along to try to solve this problem. So what do we do? How do we approach this? Well, first, we've got to get acquainted a little bit better with the fly. We know nothing about its biology. And then we have to come up with meaningful ways to manage it. So we want to know more about its natural history traits, when it's the most likely to invade the fields, so we can time whatever means we have to manage it. We have to find out what other crops or non-crop relatives of this fly exist, so we can both manage weeds around our fields efficiently, and also, and Jeff alluded to that, look for really important sources of resistance. And this brings us to what we actually need to come up with to manage this fly. Host plant resistance is #1 tactic in terms of suppressing emerging pests. It's a really important tool we have that we have to capitalize on as best we can. We're also going to try to figure out if we can use fungi, that some of them are entomopathogenic. If we can get them to establish inside the stems of quinoa endophytes, we're golden. We've solved a lot of problems. We're also going to test effectiveness of pesticides. That's really important for farmers. As we're working to hone the more sophisticated tactics, we've got to give them something to help mitigate the problem at hand right away. And the goal is to come up with this holistic approach to pass on to everybody who's growing quinoa, who's studying this problem, and trying to elevate this crop, because it's worth solving. This problem is really worth solving. Quinoa is fantastic. It's a climate-resistant crop we already grow that has superior nutritional qualities for us. And we've already have really important key partnerships in place. And so this is what we're doing in our IPM work to accelerate adoption of climate-resistant crops so we can grow it on a larger scale. Thank you.
Jim says you can take the other states out of there and leave Colorado. Well, thank you all. That was great. Can we give him another hand? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Gene, and he's going to lead the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, right. And I need to get Perry though, but I can. Do I have to?
I'm just going to move it so that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll help you. So we get situated here. The way that this works, everybody, is that I will run the mic out to you. We'll have questions, I think, Paula. There'll be questions online. Is anybody monitoring the questions online? Okay, we've got those. And then you guys can fire off the questions. We'll try to have a discussion. If you don't ask questions, I can sit here all afternoon because I know what everybody's working on. So you don't want to hear that. So anybody want to start with the first question for this group? Here we go, Jim Ehrlich. And now say your name too and where you're from.
My name is Jim Ehrlich, and I'm from the San Luis Valley. So do Idaho, Oregon, and Washington have the same fly?
Same fly from each of those states that you were here? Yeah, this is why I'm a runner.
That's an awesome question. So most of them do, yes. It's really definitely context dependent. The more quinoa, the bigger the problem. There are a couple other insects and diseases that cause an issue. with quinoa. But this fly is everywhere. The magnitude of the problem depends on the acreage of quinoa.
And you had mentioned one of the solutions might be different rotations. Is there any research that suggests that yet in any other states? Are they all having, I mean, they all dealing with the same thing?
So we are the pioneers. There's no other research. There's no other publication. What we're trying to do is probably going to get carried on to other states, I would assume. And we'll collaborate with them as the project grows.
Super. Okay, next question. Let's go. Come on, everybody. Step up. Here we go.
Thank you. I'm Jorge. I work here at Agricultural Biology. But a comment and a question. So thank you for all the speakers and congratulations. I mean, it's great to know what you are doing. It's fantastic. There are many things that we don't know are happening. But my question is this. We know what is increasing the problem. And for me, it's global warming. So beside what you are doing or we are trying to do, is there something else that we can do to fight the big problem? I mean, if we input an artificial intelligence, all the data, maybe it will say, stop global warming as the solution. So is there something that I also not imagine that we can do about that?
Okay, anybody want to take that on, have an opinion about that? Because I could sort of, I mean, Chris, you've been working in different aspects of water from the Ogallala, right? South Platte, probably some over in the Colorado River Basin, I imagine. And the temperature thing is really a big idea. So in terms of the modeling you're doing, what are you seeing in terms of the increasing temperatures? Are there any real dramatic changes we're seeing in terms of the data that's available, like in terms of climatic?
Well, I think the big thing is, at least for myself, I used to think of climate change, global warming as just less water. And I would look to the mountains. And really, we're talking about changes in the timing, the quantity, the variability. So in some of the work that we're doing, we're looking at, peak runoff being 2 or 3 weeks earlier. But it's not just kind of the water that we're getting. It's also the changing weather conditions where the demands for that water is. It's the combination of how those two are changing. And so in terms of what we can do, I think what we can do as scientists is we can inform people about what their options are. And then we're going to have to make some difficult choices. I mean, throughout much of the West, water is already fully appropriated, belongs to someone. And so we're going to have to decide both how can we be more efficient with the water that we have, but also these difficult choices about how do we allocate those resources against increasingly growing demands.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a question of sort of the mitigation aspects, right? And so, like, I mean, Mark's work, I mean, in terms of the livestock industry, in terms of reducing methane, I mean, sort of what are you seeing across the spectrum of research?
Well, across the spectrum from just methane, a lot of the work has occurred or started in Australia, New Zealand, where there are markets involved with that and looking at the genetic variability associated with methane. We have considerable genetic variability, at least in the Hereford population, but there's no reason to believe that we don't have other breeds with that same genetic variability, where with the proper tools we can impact it. You can't go to zero. The only way to go to zero is to have a dead animal. And so that's not really realistic. And so, but we could improve that and be a factor along with changed grazing regimes, maybe feed additives that reduce the overall impact from that perspective. Yeah, we're talking about manure and urine. And no. Yes. Yeah. You're right. No nitrogen going in. There's no nitrogen, but we need that. And so the question is, can we get animals to more efficiently utilize that and excrete less? And of course, that's the impact areas for that are along waterways, especially here in the Front Range with our upslope conditions and volatilization of nitrogen. And there's evidence that there's genetic differences. Now, how far we can take that, I don't know we've ascertained that yet as far as reducing the nitrogen.
Dr. Philmany?
Well, it seems like we had 3 of the talks focus on genetics changing. For wheat, people can turn over that quick, but for peaches and beef, those life cycles are a little different. Are the genetic improvements going to keep up with the pace climate's changing, and also with the pace people tend to change adoption, because some people get stuck on what they do?
Okay, who wants to tackle that? Jeff, maybe?
So while a lot of the field crops do turn over faster, there's millions of acres in crops that don't turn over as fast as we might think. The leading hybrid for sorghum has been the same one for the last 25 years. I heard they're just finally going to just stop selling it to growers so that they can turn over the new varieties. So I think that's part of the call to action, is if we want to, even for crops that can turn over more quickly, if we want to see that in growers' fields, we have to hold ourselves accountable to get traits that are really going to drive adoption. To your point, it's got to be a step change if we want to see growers adopt it.
I have a question first. So how did you grow sorghum in Colorado? I thought it was too cold.
It's not too cold. The season is short, but there's 500,000 acres of sorghum in Colorado last year, and more than that. So it's tough around Arctic, but southeast, yeah.
So, like regarding tree fruit, the turnaround for new cultivar is about 12 to 15 years. So breeding, even we have some cultivars, they might work, like to evaluate. We do a cross, last week. So we will have a cultivar that is adapted in 15 years. So in 15 years, the climate will be already different. So that's the big challenge with tree fruit. So our goal is to characterize what we have right now, see responses at the molecular level to help breeders develop something that can be more adapted. And still, we are focusing, because in terms of intermountain fruit production, but also in most of the areas that they're growing fruit, we have, in our case, we have extended summers and then late frost in the spring, because the spring is coming earlier. In other areas, they don't have enough chilling. So the same breeding programs are targeting different things. So for example, in southeast, they don't have chill winters. So they're trying to develop cultivars that doesn't work for us. So our goal is to characterize what we have and inform growers, and then the growers can take some measures, because at the same time, we're evaluating horticultural methods, like how to manage them and, adapt them better with what we can.
We got a question over here.
So without considering adoption, because we know that adopting new cultivars can be a challenge, especially in something like peach, where you have a tree, not just a plant that you seed every year. And I'd like to hear from the animal side as well. What's the biggest roadblock to actually finding and utilizing these, if we're utilizing wild species to bring in traits for drought tolerance or drought resistance or climate resiliency? What's the biggest roadblock to being able to find and use those in a real breeding population? And I'm really curious from the animal side too, because you just have so much less availability of the kind, you're constricted by the kind of crosses you can make compared to somebody like me. I'm a potato breeder and I can make a lot of fun crosses, but animals are a little different. So I'd like to hear from both the plant and the animal side.
Start on the plant side first, or who wants to go? You want to start with that one? Here we go. With the.
So Rex Bernardo, a plant breeding professor at Minnesota, describes the process of plant breeding the way it's mostly done now, as if, Ford, when they wanted to make a new vehicle, they took all the parts from, an F-150 and a Taurus, and mixed all the parts together and made thousands of different vehicles that were just mixes of the parts of a truck and a sedan. Continuing that analogy, when we're looking at bringing in that ancient diversity, it's like going back to the Model T. That's caught up with a lot of traits, right, that are not going to be relevant, to the point where it's not even clear what drought tolerance means in a wild relative, whether it's even the same thing as in a crop. And so our biggest challenge is using whatever technology we can to decouple the individual traits that we might want from that whole background. What I showed with the integration is just one way. using CRISPR-Cas9 editing would be another way, just to look in the genomes of the ancient relatives and make that change with CRISPR in the modern variety. So I think there's a lot of new ways that we can pull apart the individual pieces we might want to look at for future agriculture and separate that from the past.
Yeah, from the animal perspective, our biggest, when I think of especially beef cattle and sheep, they're very extensively produced. So it's really characterizing the environment that you want those in. In the beef industry, our average generation, interval returning generation, is about every 6 years within a herd. So we could do it relatively quickly, and it's becoming more and more adopted through the use of AI, which is more accepted and utilized in even greater numbers than it has in the past. We can disseminate those good genetics. The question is, how do we identify those good genetics? And especially from a methane and a nitrogen excretion standpoint, it's sparse data. Well, we need lots of data to associate that and develop the genomic markers. Once we have the genomic markers, then we can select the animals by just taking a DNA sample and really add accuracy to our prediction. The dairy industry, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. The dairy industry has done that very well, where they've, obviously thousands dairy, very good data reporting system, get DNA, and with the addition of genomic information, I believe it's 1.5 to 2 times as fast improving milk production than it has prior to that. And so really from a beef cattle and an extensive environment standpoint, it is, what are the traits that are important for a cow to survive in northern Arizona versus Nevada versus Saratoga, Wyoming?
To add on that, just to highlight the importance of local impact for research, for example, in perennial fruit trees, whatever applies to California doesn't apply with us, or whatever applies with us doesn't apply anywhere. So ag experimentation having diverse locations where the production is and applied research just to identify traits of adaptability is so important information for everyone to start understanding mainly where to look and what kind of traits we need to bring up for adaptation, either that's drought or cold tolerance in perennials.
We have a question for Perry. Is that what it is online, or Perry has it? Okay, you want to read them?
This is from JB in the Ark Valley. A hard question. It seems like through modern plant breeding, we gain yield, but we lose the natural resiliency. Right now, we have to go back to ancient crop or niche crop to save water or better environment adaptation. Will this become new trend in agriculture, and is it a bad thing?
Okay, who wants to take that one? Yeah.
Okay. Honestly, having been here for just over 2 years, I feel like this is the central challenge for my department. We have programs that are really excited about leveraging the incredible value that's available in plants that have adapted in nature solely to the stresses in their environments, and we have programs that are very aligned with the current agricultural industry. The only way I think we move forward is if we force ourselves to bring those two pieces together. And I think historically that's been really hard. It's been a lot easier for people to stay in their 2 camps that I showed on those slides. I don't think we have an excuse anymore. We actually have the technology we need to get the best of both worlds. And what we really need is to kind of sit down together and talk about how to do that step by step. So to answer JP's question, it's like, yes, we can do it, but we have to kind of step up and change how we've been doing things.
I'm going to ask Perry. Perry, can you hear me? Okay, Perry, why are you doing artificial insemination up there? Oh, I got that wrong. I'm sorry. I have a question for you, Perry. Perry, with the work you're doing up in the Colorado River Basin, what do you think? I mean, you go by if you guys haven't been in the Grand Valley Research Center, Perry's got it's absolutely wired. It's got sensors everywhere, wires running all over the place. Well, what about the adoption of some of these practices that you are sort of, this idea that you're preaching about consumptive use? You want to maybe comment on maybe some of the challenges you're having, either technological or sociological up there?
Yeah, I think that, it's a fair observation to say that most producers are not going to want to spend, $50,000 per acre to do a variable rate irrigation system. But, we go that far in order to discover, one or two useful variables. Maybe it's an electrical conductivity patch, something that sort of might govern the timing of irrigation. So I think that the real gains to be made, variable rate is certainly going to be available like anything technology comes down, but the real gains are going to be made in learning how far between our irrigations we can actually go. Because, it's widely known, honest producers will say that they over irrigate here. Some of that's, unintentional. It's just furrow irrigation. But there are very likely the over irrigation is unnecessary. It's simply a sort of a residual effect of the perceptions about their water rights, or just, kind of legacy knowledge. If we can deliver, like I said, one or two, they call it data mining for a reason. You're looking for some nugget of information in there. So if we can find those nuggets that would then drive a producer, whether they're on a furrow irrigated system, a sprinkler, or a drip, to realize that, oh, I don't have to quite, I don't have to irrigate that one extra set. I always say, we got producers irrigating 10 sets on alfalfa. Well, if we could go to 9 sets, that's literally 10%. That can be 1 acre foot less of water that has to be diverted from the river. That's not an insignificant amount.
Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Great seminars. And so I'm sitting here, and I think one of the struggles that we all face as scientists dealing with climate is that it asks more of us than our own technical expertise. And so I'm going to ask each one of you the same question. And I think the question is if I could give you a research scientist who's top-notch on any field into your lab to help you address the biggest climate problems that you see in the next 5 years, what expertise would you hire? Okay?
I do microbiome if I was, okay. I just thought I would say the right, anyway. Okay, let's start with Chris.
I was going to say an economist, but yeah, yeah, this is tough. Already, so most of the work that I presented, I didn't list all the team members, but it's across a wide range of disciplines. I think I don't want to, with the dean sitting here, I don't want to say we don't need any extra help, but CSU has some amazing expertise. So the modeling effort that we're working on here, yes, we've centered it in the South Platte, but one of the big things that we're trying to do is make the model flexible enough so we can run simulations to take those outputs to other basins where they don't have the expertise. We could always, use more engineers, more crop scientists, more hydrologists, et cetera for my work, but well, and maybe somebody else can chime in, especially when it comes to climate change. But one thing that I struggle with a little bit is we've got downscaled climate scenarios. The gap between what those are, and these are the possibilities, and what we predict, I struggle with that disconnect, right? We can run 8 different scenarios and say, this is the outcome here, here, and here. But then if a water manager says, what should I count on? That challenge is difficult for me to respond to. I think in most areas around the world, when we've seen really significant institutional change, it's because it's had to happen. And that's kind of where we're getting to at the Colorado River Basin also, right? When the federal government steps in and says, if you guys don't make a decision, exactly. You know, in the research that we're doing, the kind of results suggest that the institutions can determine who gets shorted, but climate and population growth is really determining how much the shortages are. So that doesn't answer your question, but yeah.
I will add, so in plant science or perennial trees, I'm looking for a data scientist with plant physiology background. So first of all, I'm Greek, so Greeks don't do well with statistics. No, it is an old joke that Greeks don't do well with statistics. Second, I'm pomologist. Pomologists also, they don't know any statistics. So when I started this job, and okay, I said we need more data, more data, more data. Then I saw the data, I say, okay, what I'm doing with that? Because you spend a lot of time to figure out what technology will give you the data, like some years, validate it. And then you say, okay, who is next student? Take all statistics classes and try to be the best pomologist that knows statistics. For me, like if we want to make advancements of this kind of new technology in agriculture systems, engineers, data scientists, computer science need to have agriculture background because that's the miscommunication we have with them.
We have a really good team, but I think our lack is as we develop more of the environmental sustainability traits, knowing what the downstream effects of that are. So we really need somebody, much like what Chris and their team does, that is genetics economics modeler, and also looking at it from a long-term sustainability standpoint. I mean, there's a lot of very precise genetic modeling looking at, well, if I put these two together, what happens to my overall inbreeding rate over time, yada, yada. But really, it's a lack of incorporating the economics and the environmental sustainability traits, where right now the environmental sustainability traits don't have value to your rancher outside of Fort Collins.
Kelly, I think you know I started in microbial research, and so I still and I still remember what it was like to have an idea, to make a hypothesis and test it next week. Crops are so slow to go from an idea to testing. Yeah, so I'm going to ask, since we're getting what we want, I'm going to ask actually for a new faculty position, not somebody in my lab. We need biotechnology to make going from idea to prototype in crops like 10 times faster. And that could be done with a dedicated biotechnologist.
I think there was a Star Trek episode on that or something, right? There was a Star Trek episode on that where they sprinkled something on a crop and it grew. There was something. Okay, there you go. So I think that the abiotic and biotic stresses in plants are coupled, and their responses to that are coupled, right? And it often baffles me how little we still know about how plants actually work. And so I would like a plant physiologist and a plant geneticist, because there is just a wealth of resources within the plants, and we don't understand how indirect defenses, those ones that call for help and get natural enemies to a plant infested with insects, are actually coupled to direct defense, which is what breeders select in their programs, right? We don't even understand that for, a handful of plants. So I think those are the two things I would like.
Oh, wait, we're not done yet. Perry gets, but I don't want to hear Perry's answer. This is the problem. Okay, James, get out of here. Okay, we're going to ask Perry now. Okay, can't hear you, Perry, for some reason. Okay, here we go.
Well, I'm not sure if this satisfies you. I was going to make. I actually really appreciate the field of economics, and I'm thrilled with some of my partnerships in that profession. With so Chris, the work you do is kind of front and center with the questions I get asked a lot. I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say that we produce a lot of really high-level research. I mean, I don't think that's a limb. I think we all know that. What I'm just going to take that question and say that I think a lot of our problems are in delivery, and I live in an extension world. And so the kind of support that my program needs are essentially support for whether you call them extension agents targeted in certain areas, but folks that can take the data that we are producing, as Gene asked, I've got a fancy irrigation system. Well, there's going to be information that we discover that becomes valuable to farmers, but I cannot say that I have the time to go to all these places. It's a big ass place out here trying to cover all these basins, and really being able to get out and reach to farmers is, I mean, that's really where I'm high centered on capacity for delivery.
I think we're done. We're up to time, so let's first and foremost give our panelists a great round of applause. Second, I'd like to just take a moment. Jan will be, who initiated this whole thing all year, is going to be stepping into, kingdom now, running everything all over the world. But Jan's going to be stepping aside this summer. So let's give her a round of applause. This is a great idea for the college in terms of building community.
Okay, I want to thank everyone that's been involved in this, and thank you for your questions and for attending. And sitting in the audience, we have after you have your treats out here, don't forget to stop for treats and have discussions about collaborations. There's another seminar this afternoon. Barry Goldman from Pluton's Biosciences. Pluton, come on. We'll be talking this afternoon in biomedical behavioral sciences. Yeah. And also tomorrow morning he'll have a coffee talk. So go enjoy some treats.